Socrates warned us about the life unlived. Plato gave us shadows on a cave wall, but no one predicted the glow of a touchscreen would become the most seductive shadow of all. Today, we scroll, not out of hunger but out of habit. We tap not to discover but to distract. And every swipe brings us deeper, not into knowledge but into numbness. The irony is cruel. We live in an age of unlimited information, and yet the self grows more obscure than ever. We know the news, the trends, the algorithms, the avatars, but ask someone who they are, what they truly believe, why they act, what they fear, and silence follows. Not because the answer is hidden, but because the question has stopped being asked. We've mistaken looking for examining. We've confused input for insight. The screen is bright, but the mind behind it dims. And in this light-polluted world, we don't even notice the darkness growing inside. This is not the dystopia of chains and censorship. It is the quiet, passive erosion of reflection. A life not taken by force, but surrendered by apathy. Socrates told us, the unexamined life is not worth living. He was tried, condemned, and killed for daring to question. Today, no one needs to silence us. We silence ourselves, one scroll at a time. When Socrates stood before the Athenian jury, accused of corrupting the youth and dishonoring the gods, he did not beg. He did not flatter. He did not even try to save his own life. Instead, he made a simple claim. The unexamined life is not worth living. To most of us, this sounds extreme. Isn't life valuable in itself? Isn't survival always worth fighting for? But Socrates wasn't talking about life as breathing or life as existing. He was talking about life as becoming. A life not examined, he believed, is a life without growth, without direction, without meaning. To live, in his view, was not just to move from birth to death. It was to continually ask, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Is this good? Is this true? This wasn't philosophy as abstraction. It was philosophy as oxygen. And without it, he argued, we are not living. We are simply lasting. That's why he would rather die than stop questioning. Because a life without reflection, for Socrates, is not neutral. It's dangerous. It leaves us vulnerable to manipulation, to tyranny, to becoming someone else's tool without ever realizing it. That's the deeper meaning behind his choice. Socrates did not die because he loved death. He died because he could not live falsely. And if we lose this understanding, if we let life become just a list of likes, schedules, achievements, or entertainments, then we haven't just ignored Socrates. We've proven him right. The concept of imprisonment has historically referred to the loss of physical freedom. However, in modern digital contexts, a different form of constraint has emerged, one rooted not in walls but in patterns of attention and behavior. Today, large-scale digital systems shape what individuals see, think, and do, often through algorithms designed to maximize engagement. These systems present curated content based on previous clicks, likes, and viewing time. Over time, they begin to narrow the range of information encountered, reinforcing preferences and minimizing exposure to unfamiliar perspectives. This environment creates what is commonly called a filter bubble or echo chamber. Within such a structure, users may feel informed, entertained, and connected, but their intellectual environment is increasingly self-referential. Dissonant information becomes rare, friction disappears. The experience is often seamless. Content appears personalized. Convenience is high. But the trade-off is subtle. Repetition replaces examination. The feed scrolls, but reflection stalls. Engagement metrics reward immediacy over depth, affirmation over questioning. From this perspective, one might describe the condition as a form of comfortable imprisonment, a setting in which choices appear abundant, yet are shaped by unseen constraints. Unlike traditional censorship, this is not imposed from above. It emerges from design, data, and habituation. In such a context, the kind of critical inquiry Socrates advocated, slow, uncomfortable, and open-ended, becomes increasingly rare. Not because it is forbidden, but because the system offers few incentives for it. This shift does not affect all individuals equally. Some maintain habits of reflection, seek out disagreement, or deliberately disconnect. But the broader trend raises questions about what happens when societies prioritize algorithmic efficiency over philosophical depth. The result may not be overt control, but passive drift, away from examination and toward a form of living that feels full yet lacks internal direction. Socrates believed that self-examination begins with dialogue, not only with others but within oneself. This inner dialogue is the silent activity of questioning one's motives, reviewing one's beliefs, and considering the ethical dimensions of one's actions. In contemporary life, the space for such reflection has become increasingly limited. Many daily interactions are mediated by digital stimuli that prioritize speed, brevity, and reaction. Notifications, timelines, and rapid content consumption fragment attention and reduce the likelihood of sustained introspection. This environment does not necessarily eliminate thought, but it alters its rhythm. Rather than pausing to reflect, individuals may find themselves responding reflexively, reacting to a message, a headline, a video, or a comment, often without time to engage with its deeper implications. Moreover, when information is constantly externalized, stored in devices, outsourced to search engines, or filtered through feeds, the habit of reasoning through questions internally can diminish. The mind becomes accustomed to retrieval over reflection. This erosion of inner dialogue has several potential consequences. Without regular self-questioning, individuals may become more susceptible to external narratives, less aware of internal contradictions, and slower to recognize the ethical stakes of their choices. The issue is not that people no longer think, but that the quality and independence of thought may be compromised. The silence once used for insight is now often filled by curated noise. And in the absence of inner conversation, critical faculties can atrophy. While some may still cultivate reflective practices through journaling, solitude, or conversation, the broader cultural momentum leans toward distraction. This trend does not erase Socratic ideals, but it makes them harder to sustain. And where there is no inner dialogue, the examined life begins to disappear, not with a crisis, but with a quiet forgetting. Digital technologies are not neutral tools. They carry embedded assumptions about what is valuable, what is relevant, and what should be seen. In environments shaped by recommendation algorithms, individuals are often presented with information tailored to their past behavior. This personalization, while convenient, contributes to a growing fragmentation of the self. Each platform encourages a slightly different mode of self-expression. One may cultivate a professional identity on LinkedIn, an aesthetic presence on Instagram, an ironic tone on X, or a reactive posture on TikTok. Over time, these differentiated selves become routines, refined not through introspection, but through feedback loops of likes, shares, and impressions. The result is not necessarily deception, but a kind of distributed identity, a person stretched across platforms, optimized for visibility rather than coherence. This fragmentation can make self-examination more difficult. Reflection requires a unified sense of the self over time. But when behavior is guided by short-term metrics across disjointed contexts, continuity becomes harder to establish. The question, "Who am I?" may give way to "How am I performing?" or "How am I being perceived?" Furthermore, the architecture of digital life often prioritizes immediacy over memory. Posts disappear, content scrolls past, profiles are edited. In such a setting, long-term moral development can be displaced by short-term signaling. Growth becomes performative. Consistency gives way to adaptation. Socrates saw the examined life as one in which a person strives to become more just, more wise, and more self-aware. Today, that journey may be interrupted, not by force but by fragmentation. Each algorithm rewards a version of the self, but no algorithm rewards integrity. And without a space to reconcile these selves, the task of self-knowledge becomes not just difficult, but structurally undermined. Self-knowledge, as understood by Socrates, is not simply knowing facts about oneself. It is the result of sustained inquiry, an ongoing effort to align belief, behavior, and values. It requires time, honesty, and a willingness to confront discomfort. In the contemporary world, several forces make this process increasingly rare. First, the pace of modern life discourages reflection. Constant connectivity keeps individuals in a state of responsiveness. Quiet moments that once allowed for contemplation are now often filled by media consumption, social updates, or notifications. As attention fragments, so does the capacity for deeper self-awareness. Second, external validation has become more visible and more influential. Metrics such as likes, followers, and engagement scores create immediate feedback. While feedback can be useful, it can also shift attention away from internal standards and toward public performance. Over time, individuals may come to evaluate themselves not by who they are, but by how they appear. Third, the culture of certainty discourages uncertainty. Socratic questioning often begins with admitting ignorance, but in many online and social spaces, changing one's mind or acknowledging complexity is seen as weakness. The pressure to appear confident, especially in public forums, can prevent honest self-examination. Fourth, self-knowledge is not a marketable product. Many systems, from education to advertising, are designed to influence behavior, not to cultivate introspection. The marketplace favors clarity, predictability, and identity-based targeting. A self in flux is harder to reach, harder to sell to, and harder to categorize. Finally, language itself is shifting. Terms like authenticity, truth, and identity are increasingly contested. As meanings blur, the tools for understanding the self become less reliable. Without shared definitions, even the act of introspection becomes harder to communicate or sustain. These factors do not make self-knowledge impossible, but they create an environment in which it requires more effort, more intentionality, and more resistance to prevailing habits. The examined life may still be possible, but it is no longer the path of least resistance. If the examined life has grown rare, it is not because it has lost value, but because its practice has become less visible, less convenient, and less encouraged. Yet the path remains available. To reclaim it requires deliberate effort, often quiet, often slow. First, create space for reflection. In an environment that rewards speed and reaction, making time for stillness is a form of resistance. This might mean setting boundaries with technology, practicing solitude or journaling, not for others to read, but to think in one's own voice. Second, develop the habit of questioning. Socratic inquiry does not demand formal philosophy. It begins with simple questions. Why do I believe this? Where did this idea come from? What if I am wrong? Asking these questions regularly helps loosen inherited assumptions and create room for independent thought. Third, seek conversations, not confirmations. While much of modern discourse is structured around agreement or argument, Socratic dialogue aims for discovery. Reclaiming the examined life means engaging others not to win, but to understand. Listening deeply becomes just as important as speaking clearly. Fourth, tolerate ambiguity. Many important questions do not yield simple answers. Socratic thought accepts that wisdom often means living with uncertainty. In a culture that prizes certainty, learning to sit with doubt is a rare but essential skill. Fifth, anchor values in practice. The examined life is not only about thought, it is about action. For Socrates, virtue was not an abstract idea, but a way of living. Reclaiming that life means aligning words and behavior even when no one is watching. This work is not efficient. It does not scale. It may not be rewarded by algorithms or recognized by metrics. But it restores agency. It rebuilds a self that is coherent, responsible, and capable of change. In reclaiming the examined life, the goal is not to arrive at certainty, but to recover the capacity to ask and to live by better questions. If Socrates were alive today, he would not write viral threads or deliver keynote speeches. He would walk, he would ask, and he would listen. He would likely be misquoted, blocked, downvoted. He would ask uncomfortable questions in spaces designed for quick takes. His refusal to offer easy answers would frustrate many. His insistence on examining assumptions would slow conversations that were designed to be fast. But he would persist, not because he believed he had the truth, but because he believed truth was worth seeking. In that sense, the Socratic model remains strikingly relevant. A human being, not claiming wisdom, but committed to the discipline of looking more closely at words, at values, at life itself. Today's feed offers a constant stream of content, curated to please, provoke, or distract. It is the opposite of a quiet walk through the agora. It encourages reaction over reflection, spectacle over sincerity. But the examined life is still possible, just harder to find and harder to protect. It happens when someone pauses before reposting, when someone questions a headline instead of sharing it, when disagreement is met not with outrage but curiosity, when silence is used not as withdrawal but as attention. To bring Socratic integrity into the present is not to reject modern life. It is to reintroduce intentionality into it. It means choosing moments when we resist the pull of the feed to ask, what am I doing? What do I believe? Why do I believe it? And even, who am I becoming? Socrates may not survive today's platforms, but the spirit of his method, humility, inquiry, and the pursuit of a more coherent self remains a necessary counterbalance to a digital culture that rewards immediacy over depth. We cannot pause the algorithm, but we can pause ourselves, and in that pause, recover what makes life not just bearable, but worth living.